you played a very precocious character in Doctor Who, but in conversation with you yesterday, it became apparent that not precocity, but intelligence is something you very much bring to the table. We were talking about Kant's categorical imperative as it relates to bullfighting yesterday, and my opinion is that as long as the bull gets a fair go at the matador, that's fine. But was
I don't know what he's talking about.
well,
I think I might have had a couple of glasses of wine. I do remember we touched on bullfighting.
yeah, and then fox hunting and all sorts. But
Yes.
was
I'm against them, by the way.
it was a bit more nuanced than that.
Well, it was nuanced, yes. It's true, because I do think in paragraphs.
Yeah.
I do try and think in paragraphs, but nonetheless. Yeah.
Well, that's an excellent way of saying what I was about to ask you. Did you find there was an awful lot of unsaid thought that drove you into writing these paragraphs of thought that needed to be almost expunged, as it were, or almost purged by the act of pinning them to a piece of paper?
I've never thought of it like that. Maybe there's something in it. I've never actually considered it quite that way. But as I say, it's certainly something that was bubbling in my mind, and when I put it down, it was something I felt I'd been working on for a long time, for much longer than just the period of time it took to write. But again, I don't think that's unusual. I think that's pretty standard with people who write. You know, things bubbling in your head for a long time, one way or another, and suddenly a moment in your life suddenly comes back to you 25 years later and becomes a germ of a story. Or we know that's, and what are we? We are our memories, aren't we? That's what human beings are made up of. It's really what we are. We are our memories.
Time Lord even more so.
Well, he's got a lot more memories. He's got like hundreds of years of memories, as well as a ginormous brain.
So when I was asking about authors who'd influenced you, in your style of writing, are you influenced as much by playwrights or by great actors as you are as by authors?
Yeah, and also music. I like song lyrics. I sometimes, yeah, I think, again, I think everything you like, and maybe that you don't like, somehow gets into your mind and becomes a part of what you are and a part of what you write. It's not a conscious sense, and I don't write like Henry James, and I don't write like Robert Holmes, but they're both writers I really like, and they're both somewhere in what I do in different ways. I think everything, all the sort of information you take in that you like, all the art that you see and hear one way or another, all becomes part of when you try and make a work of art of a kind, without, again, maybe it's a bit pretentious, but something. You're drawing on all the things that you like and are affected by and moved by.
Did you take a lot of influence from your time in America as well?
The novels are all set in America, yeah. They're all set in the three novels are all set in New York City, which is a city I know really well and always really liked. Though again, you see, most of us have versions of New York City which are not only the real place, even when you know the city really well. All of us, everybody has a vision of New York City they got from a movie, from a Woody Allen film, or from comic books. When I was reading about New York when I was 7 years old, when I was reading Spider-Man comics, and that was a version of New York that was in my imagination, long before I ever actually saw the real city itself. And that's, the New York in my novels is partly invented New York. It's New Yorks that things that I imagined New York was like when I was reading comic books and when I was watching, or still do watch, Woody Allen movies or TV shows set in New York. Lots of us have a great romantic idea about New York who have never been there, and it's rather wonderful. And I suppose we do it all sorts of Paris. Loads of people have an idea about Paris. They don't have to even go there to have a sense of what Paris is. That's the way the imagination works, I think, isn't it?
Well, Will Self would call it psychogeography, the way
yes, that is
the way we think about the landscape, the way the landscape affects what we think. Psychogeography. Will Self would call it that, because Will Self is a prat.
He's not wrong, though.
He's not wrong, but he is a bit pompous, is all I'm saying.
He can be very funny. Oh dear, Will. We're not going to be rude about Will, are we?
No, he is very funny.
Very clever chap, quite funny. But
and a recovering heroin addict, so all credit to him for that.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
good old Will.
Yeah. Yes. With his face like a tomb.
Well, his ex-wife is the MP of Hastings, where I'm living at the moment.
Oh, really?
Amber Rudd, who was in fact the Home Secretary till a few months ago. But she was Will Self's ex. God. No, she wasn't. No, I'm getting unmixed. No, forget that. Cancel that. She was that A.R. Gill. A.A. Gill. Yeah, sorry. Oh, thank God we corrected that. That was really embarrassing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Which they're not really remotely similar, except they're funny and they are a bit Pratt-like.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Imagine
so
Will Self writing in to complain a letter of complaint that nobody can understand. Yeah. So that kind of the sense of geography, the grounded sense of a place, is something that is kind of missing from a lot of science fiction like Doctor Who, because it's set in places we don't know, we can't imagine particularly, we've got no experience of them. Did you deliberately try to move towards something that was more kind of intuitively relatable?
no, I didn't think of it like that at all. No, very good question, but no, I didn't actually think I'm not writing science fiction. In fact, the short story does include a science fiction story, though it is set in New York, and it's rather sexy actually. So I did have a go at writing a science fiction story. But no, it just seemed to be what I could write. Yeah. Well, one of the things you do when you try and write is you write what you can write. You end up falling into what it is that somehow works, or that your capacity to write just contains that particular element of evoking a city or inventing an eccentric character who lives in it or something. It's just basically you do what you can do. So that's really banal, isn't it? It's not untrue though.
No, it makes sense, because you have writers like Neil Gaiman, for example, will talk about just having written a novel that they've waited 30 years to write, because they knew what they wanted to write, but they didn't have the technical skill to accomplish it.
Right.
Do you have anything bubbling under at the moment that you think maybe when I'm a better craftsman I'll
yeah, well, there are all sorts of things. I haven't written anything for a couple of years, but I'm hoping to write again, and yes, I have got things floating about. And you do hope to develop, even if you actually don't. You certainly hope that you improve. And I'm sure that if I write another novel, it will be better than my first novel. I hope it would. I think most of us hope we develop to some extent. So yeah, you end up doing things you couldn't have done 10 years earlier or 15 years earlier or whatever it might be.
And was that your experience of acting as well? Was that very much learnt on the job under almost the tutelage of the doctors, as it were?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'd already I'd been in the serial of the BBC already, and but yeah, you have to learn very fast when you're obviously very young and you're pulled into something like this. You learn very fast.
Did you find looking back, do you think being young was an advantage? Do you think you were adaptable and flexible in a way that maybe in a few years' time you wouldn't have been able to achieve?
I hope I'm, when I do act nowadays, I hope I'm still a creative actor. I try to be. I like the idea of the actor not as simply a sort of passive participant who's just grateful for the job, even though one loves working. I'm very aware that I've been very lucky anyway. But one does want to be, in some sense, a part of sort of creative aspect of it. I do believe strongly in the actor. I think people underestimate the creative possibility of an actor, because they do think they just get told, here's the script, put on your costume and that. And all that's absolutely fine. But I hope I'm an imaginative enough person that I am a creative actor and an actor who develops to some extent, yes.
And how would you go about that? Would that be by embellishing a backstory for a character?
It's not impossible, yes. Or, I mean, one of the things one does always in Doctor Who is I believed in the scene. So if I was in the scene, I did actually imagine I was in a time machine. I managed to believe I was in a time machine. Or if I'm walking through a wood, I imagined, on a sort of cardboard wood in a TV centre. I always tried to imagine it was the place. I always tried to imagine what's it like to be in this actual place, as far as I can. And on the stage as well, one always sort of pictures the place you're in, even if it's just you're actually standing in a room with just black walls and an audience. You can still sort of place yourself in your imagination in the place where the character is, and of course in the state of mind that the character's in.
Is it very difficult to move from stage, having done a lot of television as a young man? Because stage is a very different technique, isn't it?
It is different, yeah. I mean, I suppose I did do quite a lot of theatre after Doctor Who. And again, I suppose, did I get better? I suppose so. But it wasn't. I mean, most British actors then were theatre actors who sometimes did TV. Most British actors, which I think it's fair to say at that time, were essentially classical actors, most of them, because I wasn't really trained exactly, but but most trained actors are trained with classical techniques. They were then. Being able, but I knew what an iambic pentameter was, even when I was in Doctor Who. I knew about the rhythm. I read a lot of verse. I quite like poetry and things, so I knew that sort of technique anyway. I knew what and it affects your performance. The fact that as a really young actor, I still knew what the rhythm of a sentence meant, the rhythm of a scene meant, the rhythm of a speech, anything, which is a sort of classical thing, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I've kind of got a question here that's probably come from the mouth of Paul Carmichael, because we have a continual thing about Shakespeare. Neither of us agree with this modern nonsense with Shakespeare, where people say you don't have to understand every word as long as you say the rhythm. Would you agree with that, or do you?
No, I think you want to. Not that I've done much Shakespeare. I would say that you want to. It is best to understand as much as possible. Yeah, no, you want to understand as much as possible. Though it is basically true, though, that rhythm is a lot of it. If you can't handle the rhythm, understanding doesn't, or only helps to some extent. I mean, the fact is those things are written rhythmically, and they're structured. And they're basically the way they're structured is telling you the way to speak them. But still, yeah, ideally you want to understand it. I imagine it helps. It always helps. Mind you, half the people who directed Doctor Who didn't understand it. Half the guest stars hadn't got a clue what was going on. You received Christopher Bitmead script, you'd be so relieved to go back to Shakespeare. We had a load. I love Christopher Bitmead, and I loved both of the stories he did that I was in, but nobody had a clue what they were about. I mean, poor Fiona Cumming, the director, she hadn't got a clue. She did a lovely job with it, though. So there you can direct something really well, even if you don't understand it. Just, put the cameras in atmospheric places and do some nice panning and stuff, and there we are. So yeah, I think you can do things without understanding them, and I know damn well lots of our guest actors hadn't got a clue. I'm not sure some of our ongoing actors had much of a clue what the stories were about either.
Did you find that a particular challenge being a child genius when you had technical information or mathematical principles to recite?
Oh, I love all that stuff. I love all those unspeakable pseudo-scientific lines you get in Doctor Who. I love it. And of course, at Big Finish, we do loads of them. I love that. I love that stuff. It just sounds so good. What was that John Pertwee one? He always had one line, didn't he?
Reversing the polarity of the neutron.
Reversing the polarity of the neutron flow. That's just so great. I could say that all day.
That's why he kept it, isn't it? Yeah, it was the only one he could.
He could only handle it. I can handle at least 2 others. But no, I love all that gobbledygook. It's great fun.
Well, we've indulged my pet passions for writing and acting long enough. I think it's time we threw it open to the audience so we could get back to the Doctor Who. If that's all right. Are there any questions for Mr. Waterhouse? Gentleman down here.
Yeah, Adric or Wesley Crusher, who'd win in a fight?
Adric and who?
Adric or Wesley Crusher, who would win in a fight?
I don't know who Wesley Crusher is.
Will Wheaton.
But Adric would. Well, Adric doesn't fight, actually. Adric would just say something incredibly intelligent and walk away, and this other person would just stand there red-faced and looking like a fool. Wouldn't need any fisticuffs.
Anything from the non-violent contingent? Gentleman in the Abbey Road shirt, please.